This is part 3 on the Cynefin framework. We had 2 shows before. In part 1, we did the introduction. We basically covered the 5 domains and we talked about the various aspects and practices. And then in part 2, we talked about the essentials of liminality, how things flow between the domains and how things are put together. This is the show that everybody has been asking about and they've been waiting for. It's all about the application of the Cynefin framework.
So Cynefin is a framework, not a model nor a solution. It doesn't evaluate, but describes a situation. It gives us a way to looking at things from different perspectives so you can make decisions. And we use methods and tools that work only in a particular domain. We call this bounded applicability. In the clear domain, we use rigid constraints like compliance rules. When developing regulations, policy standards, you do that as a safety expert, while in the complicated domain. Alternatives are analyzed to create if-then predictable processes and systems to govern worker behavior. But when there's uncertainty, ambiguity, or disagreement between the experts, we move into the complex domain to resolve. And we also use different complex facilitating methods and tools. Bestness is what we do really, really well already. That's PPE, skills training, hazard identification, SMS, all really good things. Resilience is typically defined by bouncing back, shown in red and marked in A. It also could mean exploring a new opportunity, which is the blue mark by B. And it's also C, the early detection of pending danger.
Where do we start? We're going out onto our sites and our plants, wherever it is that we're based. What can we do with this information to bring it into the practical day-to-day in how we actually manage safety in the workplace? We work with stories and we create maps that really represents the reality of what's happening in the organization. We want to look at and say, where ideally would we like to go? What direction would we like to go in? How can we get less stories like this? And how can we get more stories where the green is? On the x-axis, we have guidance and direction. And we're saying here down the left-hand corner, it was excessive, micromanaged, or lacking, more was needed on the right-hand side. And we contrast that then to be productive, people had to bend the work to comply with the rules or bend the rules to get the work done. So we might be looking at the top right-hand side saying, okay, there's a huge cluster up here and this really isn't where we want to be. Where do we want to be? Maybe if we can go a little bit more towards the center. So how can we get less stories like this up on the right-hand corner and back and more stories here towards the center? So again, it's by tapping in and getting the context, developing some safe to fail experiments and seeing, can we actually shift that pattern? That shift is much more meaningful than actually going out there counting injury rates.
I love what you've done with the software. I like the idea of that topographic mapping. I understand how it all works. But my question for David is it right to assume that most of the world of work lives in this complexity or complex domain rather than complicated? Because I think that is shaping the fundamental debate.
I've argued this with some of the Safety 2 guys, that they're fundamentally creating a dichotomy between order and complexity. And the essence of humans is we learn to create order, and it's a damn good job we've got to do it. About 80-90% of what goes on in safety is probably ordered. If you look at military decision making on this, they have rules about when you can break the rules. And then they have heuristic-based control, which applies if the rules no longer apply. So I think it's a both-and process, not an either-or process. I don't see any real value, to be honest, in safety 2 as opposed to safety 1.
From me, the practical application of this is there. I can do it. I can understand it. I can look at it retrospectively. I can look at it from an individual point of view. It can work with regards to teams, with groups and things like that.
We certainly need to take this a lot further so that we can use it in a practical application in our own industries. As David has already mentioned, this applies not just to one industry, but to many industries.
Let's sort of think about how we can do a few more shows and bring practical applications into it. Real practical applications like what Charlie's doing.
We're potentially interested to do more than that, Sony. One of the things we'd be interested in is to take the work we've done on attitudinal mapping so we could have mass participation experiment on it and look at the results. because that would give Dom and people like that the data they want.
I'm beginning to see a bridge. I'm beginning to see a bridge between the tribes. That we can bridge the safety one, the methodology for safety one, which, as everyone said, is pretty much the same. My understanding of the philosophy of resilience is about functioning and operating right on the edge of failure without falling over, whereas the safety one philosophy is, hey, let's put some defenses in depth, let's make sure we don't get near the edge. In my view, that's where this debate gets so heated. And I think Cynefin is the way.
I think so.
Is the bridge. It's the bridge between all of these different disparate viewpoints and we get past the tribal nonsense.
I think the essence is a both and not an either or. And I think what you see with management movements is the next movement realizes the old way of doing things has limits. So it was like when we had business process re-engineering, we reached its limits. That doesn't mean we abandon it. We just know it doesn't work in some contexts. I think that's key. I'd be quite happy to sit down and work with you guys, design a SenseMaker instrument. So you're part of the design and you understand it, which we can make available for a mass trial. And that would be a lot of fun to do.
I think that's a brilliant suggestion.